Today, I'm going to give you all the basics and essentials you need in order to get 7 and above in the speaking exam, whether you've done the exam before or whether this is your first time. This is advice from a former IELTS examiner who's taught this IELTS exam for over 30 years. We're going to look at the marking criteria. Very important to know this before you go to any exam. We're going to look at the questions, what kind of questions they are and what they expect of you. We'll look at your own strengths and weaknesses and what you should focus on. Then we'll go through the tests specifically, giving little advice as we go. Finally, I'll make some suggestions for your preparation to this for this examination. The marking criteria. The first criteria is fluency and coherence. Then we have lexical resource, followed by grammatical accuracy and range, and of course pronunciation. So when the examiner is listening to you talk, when he is asking you questions and thinking of questions, what's he doing? Well, he's thinking of this criteria. He's testing these 4 parts to see how good you are. And then, of course, he uses the band descriptors. So these speaking descriptors are usually in a little book on his table, on his desk, or on his knee, and he's reminding himself about what it says in these descriptors. Let's look at 6 first of all. So fluency and coherence, what does it mean? What are they looking for? Well, very important part here in order to get any of the good marks is this part here where you're able to keep going. So if you're not able to keep speaking without hesitation, this means, of course, that you cannot even get 6. So that's the number one thing you've got to do. You've got to get your mouth moving and not stopping and not going, As soon as you do this, then you've got a problem because it's hesitation. And a 6 shouldn't do that. So this is the first thing, and it takes a lot of practice just speaking often. That's the fluency part. It also has coherence, may be lost at times. What does coherence mean? Well, coherence means understanding. So do we understand you? Does the examiner, when he's listening to you, know what you're talking about? And when it's a 6, often you can lose it a little bit and still get the 6. So sometimes the examiner listens, he's not quite sure, but you still get the 6. And then it says it uses a range of discourse markers and connecting words, things that make it clear where you are in the conversation or where you are in your answer, like connecting words or firstly, secondly, that kind of stuff. A little bit like writing, but people speak it more informally. Lexical resource, of course, means vocabulary. And again, if you notice, it's sufficient to speak at length, which means not short answers. A 6 and above does not give short answers. So therefore, you got to keep your mouth moving. As I say, this is the number one thing in your speaking exam. If you cannot keep speaking, then you cannot get the high mark in fluency and coherence, and it's unlikely in lexical resource because it suggests you are limited. You don't have the vocabulary. And then you talk about limited. Well, here we go to grammar. So range and accuracy. So as you see, they want short and complex sentences mixed, but the complex sentences have got to be there. So you've got to be able to make sentences that are more than just one clause. So they have 2 parts or maybe 3 parts. And you have to use different structures, a variety of structures, which is the range part. So you don't necessarily have to be correct, but you've got to be trying different kinds of grammar if possible. And even then, a 6 can do this in a limited way. They're not very flexible, but they can do it a little bit, and you still get a 6. And then we talk about errors, if you can see here in the errors part. A 6 makes frequent errors and still gets a 6 for the grammar. So the key here again is to vary the grammar, try and get some longer sentences because it keeps the flow of your conversation or your answers. And you can still make lots of errors and get a 6. So in actual fact, a 6 is not that difficult if you can get some longer sentences that are correct. You don't need a lot of them. And then we look at pronunciation, which sometimes can be a problem even for someone who is very fluent. But again, what are we looking at? For a 6, the control is variable, if you see right here. And also there's a lack of rapid speech. So this does not mean you have to speak really fast, but you don't want to speak very slowly. This is the point. And I think possibly the key part here for me, if you want a 6 or a 7, is this part here. So some good use of intonation and stress, this up and down sound that sounds like English that doesn't sound like your own language, for example. So that's a 6, and a 7, therefore, is just slightly better. Everything's just slightly better than the previous one. So we can look all the way up to the top there, and it's 9. We want to try and get the 7. So let's just quickly compare. So fluency, coherence in a 7. Well, again, here you go. And you've heard of the long turn. That's part 2 in the speaking test. But the examiner is always looking for long turns anyway. In general, long turns, as it says here in the descriptor, able to keep going and readily produce long turns without noticeable effort. So that means they want you to keep speaking and they don't want it to be short answers. They want you to keep a reasonably long answer. Also, if you notice, you can still have some hesitation and repetition and even self-correct, and you still get the 7. And when they say some hesitation, just short moments perhaps, because you're thinking quickly. But clearly, what they want is length when it comes to fluency. Number one, there's other things, of course, but they want that long turn, not just in part 2, but all through your answers, and even to a certain extent in part 1. But as you go along, part 2 and 3 are the most important parts. And again, you see similar to what we saw in a 6, except just a little bit better with these discourse markers, connecting words, etc. What about vocabulary? Well, vocabulary becomes this word, and this is a key word when you want a good mark. Now you have some flexibility, slightly better, where it suggests a few words and how to use them that others perhaps don't. For example, some less common words or idiomatic words. And these words are ones that the native speakers would usually speak. That means informally. And you're showing the ability to use one or two. No, you don't need to speak lots and lots of these. It would sound strange. But if you show one or two, then that suggests you've got some flexibility, and up you go to a 7 if you can keep it going. And then grammatical range and accuracy. So if you remember, we could make errors for a 6. Again, it says error-free sentences are frequent, but not always, as you see down here. Squiggly lines, but here we go. A few basic errors persist. So a 7 still makes basic errors. The key thing for the grammar is to be trying to use these complex sentences, which means at least more than one clause. You've got to do this. So no, again, what does it mean? It means don't give these short answers. Try to keep it going, put it together with connecting words. And you see this also in writing, but this is more informal. You just got to keep that mouth going in order to have a good opportunity of getting a better mark. When it comes to IELTS marking on the pronunciation, these markers are a little unclear because I think it's every so often they tell you what exactly they want, and then they just say, well, a bit of what a 6 was, and then maybe some of what an 8 was, but they get no more specific than that, as you can see here. All the positive features of a band 6, they do the band 6 stuff. Maybe they touch upon some of the band 8. They make that big leap to something else. But just a little bit, and you get the 7. It's a little bit unclear, if you notice. So maybe you do one of these things and it can easily be understood throughout. You could touch on that a little bit and get the 7. But it's quite vague, and the examiner's going to interpret if you actually get to a little touch of the 8s and the 6s, if you know what I mean. For the rest of it, what's the key then? The key is, first of all, number 1, keep your mouth moving. You cannot give short answers if you want a good mark. Then it comes down to your vocabulary and your grammar. And the key here is to try and use some good complex sentences and one or two informal words that maybe I wouldn't expect as an examiner. They're not the basic words and expressions. All right, so quickly, here's some questions to ask yourself for each of these criteria on the descriptors. First of all, if you want to get to 7, ask yourself, are you able to do some of these things? Because they're basic things you must be able to do. So are you easily understood? If someone struggles to understand you, even in the fluency and coherence, so that's the coherence part, understood, there's some problem then, and you probably will not get the 7 if the examiner's not quite sure what you mean. Can you speak at length? So I've said it should be the number 1 there, actually. You gotta keep speaking. There's no use saying no answers or very short one-clause sentences. Even in part 1, should give a little more to indicate right from the beginning that you're able to speak at length. And now, do you hesitate a lot? So if you do, that's something for you to work on, the fluency part, because if you're hesitating a lot, and even if there's brief silences, that's a hesitation. So these brief silences cost you marks. You cannot go up in fluency if you are giving these brief silences. And often this is maybe because you're trying to think of a word, but if you have silence or say, that's it. You're not going to get a high mark for fluency. You've got to keep your speaking flowing. You repeat yourself. So you do you say the same thing over and over again? Why is this not good? Well, it affects your coherence because it sounds like you're going around in circles often. You just said that. So where are we going with this conversation? That's no use. Got to make progression in any conversation. I said this, then this happened. This is because da da da. You don't just repeat things and go around in circles. All right, then we look at lexical resource. Remember what that is? That's vocabulary. The number 1 thing is that you cannot just use basic, vague kind of words. They're not specific. They don't have any detail to them. Therefore, you will not get to a 7 with vocabulary just using basic words. Occasionally, you must use them maybe, but you gotta be more specific with your vocabulary. Do you know enough words to keep a conversation going and sound natural? Especially in part 3, if you answer a question, it's supposed to be a conversation. You say something and then you explain what you think and maybe you introduce some new information. That's keeping a conversation going. But if you're just answering questions, there's no conversation here. It's just a question, not for part 3, only do this in part 1, really. So these are the 2 key words. You want flexible, you don't want limited. Is your vocabulary flexible? Does that mean you know how to use it in different situations or for specific detail? You can manipulate the words to get to mean exactly what you want. Or is it limited, which means you cannot do this at all? In fact, you can't think of the words to say, and if you do, they're very basic words or they're they're the wrong words, for example, or maybe it's the wrong form of a word. That all suggests limitation. You want flexibility, you don't want limitation. It's the same, of course, in grammar. And just a little bit of a note here. Many students go into the exam having learned lots and lots of really big words, or the whole academic word list, which is very nice, but it's about what words you can use. And part of using these words is not just about the meaning, it's about the pronunciation. If you learn some good words, you better be able to pronounce them correctly, because if you use a new word and it's pronounced wrongly, obviously it's not good for your pronunciation. But also, if you say it wrongly, sometimes I don't know what word you mean. And this means coherence and understanding disappears. So you got to be careful. You only use words that you know how to pronounce. Then we come on to grammatical accuracy and range. I think could be range and accuracy, actually. Accuracy means getting your grammar correct, but it's not the only thing. As we've seen in the descriptors, you don't need to be correct all the time to get a 7. Even an 8 makes mistakes. And range, this is actually equally, if not more important. Range is that you are trying different kinds of grammar, and also that you, even if they're wrong, you're getting some correct. So the range part is something to think about. Don't answer every question using the same grammar. Even if it's 100% correct, it's not going to get you a high mark. It's the same in the writing exam. You got to show, the whole point is for you to show different things. Can you use grammar correctly? That's accuracy. Can you use different kinds of grammar? That's range, and that's the one you want to show. So I can use lots of different kinds of grammar, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, or more right than wrong. That's how you judge how far up you're going. For a 7, get some of the grammar, the complex grammar correct, and show different kinds of complex grammar correct. You've got a chance of the 7. So that's it. The complex sentences, more than one clause. So the one clause sentences are these really short sentences. You just want to at least put 2 parts to your sentence, hopefully 3 maybe. And there's the word that you want to see and hear. Flexible. Is your grammar flexible? Or is it you only know certain kinds of grammar and then you use this and it's not very flexible? So that would be limited. Then you come to pronunciation. We're thinking again of a 7. As I said, can you pronounce individual words? Obviously, if they're short, very basic words, and you cannot pronounce these words, it's not good for your pronunciation mark, because these are words you should be able to pronounce. However, if you're choosing, as I said, longer words or more formal words, or words that you have just learned and you want to show the examiner, you need to be able to pronounce these correctly. Aforementioned reasons. In pronunciation for the 5, 6, 7 levels is how the rhythm and stress, the ups and downs of your language. So in every language, it has a particular rhythm and stress. It goes up and down in particular ways. Usually they're not the same as other languages. For example, if you speak Chinese, or if you speak Mandarin, for example, and you speak Russian, for example, these have different sounds, these languages, to one another, and they have different sounds from English. So you have to learn the sound of the language. This is the thing. Can you get close to this? So sometimes people don't get close to it at all. Sometimes it's in the middle. And then sometimes it starts to sound like maybe you've got a British teacher, an American, because it's not just the accent, it's the up and the down that tells you that. And so when I mention, does your English sound like a robot? You'd say it's around about a 5. Why? Because it's flat. A robot speaks like this. It does not really have an up and down. It just goes flat like this. So that's a robot. It's not anything, basically. It's not English. It's not your language. It's just a flat sound all the way. So I understand you, but it doesn't sound very natural. A lot of students do this. They'll get about a 5 probably for that. Does your English have the ups and downs of native speaker English? So that's the sound you want to try. If you copy sounds on your iPhone or your social media or in the movies or whatever, just the sounds to try and get that sound going. That's what helps. That's what you're looking for. If you hear any native speaker speaking, how do they sound? It can have an accent, that's fine. Accents are no problem. But it's not the point. It's the up and the down of this, you know. Okay, so you're thinking word stress, of course, when you're pronouncing syllables in individual words. Intonation, what do you stress in the sentence? Or are you a robot and you don't stress anything? And connected speech is when your words flow together. You don't stop, start, and they stop in the wrong place, etc. If you say, I went to the market yesterday, that doesn't have any up or down at all. But if you put stress and connect it all together, you would say, hey, I went to the market yesterday. So copying that sound would be good, but not copying I went to the market recently, or to say it with the sound of your language. It sounds really strange for a native speaker. So that's the idea, you know. You could get marks like this, like fluency and coherence 7, lexical resource 6, grammar 6, and pronunciation 5. So then it all balances out. That looks like it's going to be something like 6 to 6.5. They now, of course, previously you only gave one number, but now you can give 7.5, 6.5, etc. So it gets all worked out. What's the average from the four? But this is the kind of thing that makes your mark. You put these together, and often they're not the same mark for each category or each criteria. It doesn't mean you always get 7 for fluency, coherence, 7 for vocabulary, 7 for grammar, and 7 for pronunciation. Often they're all different. But the number one, as I said, to begin with, if you're doing this examination, is the fluency part. You got to keep talking. Now I'm going to use some clips from my online speaking class, which I run every Saturday, and it's a practice class for those who take my speaking course. And the speaking course with my other courses is available in the links in the descriptor. So my students do the course, and then every Saturday I give them 1 hour's live practice with particular questions, etc. I'm going to let you hear clips from some of this, and you can think as you hear what kind of mark would you give the person who's speaking? I'm not going to play the whole thing, just little clips, but think about the fluency and coherence and what I've said, the lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and the pronunciation. Think about those things as you listen, and then we can consider 1 or 2 elements from them. So let's go.
Don't like going to crowded places. Um, uh, I don't know why, but uh, the noisy atmosphere often makes me feel uh, um,
So do you feel anxious, for example, in noisy places? All right, so the question was, do you like going to crowded places? Now, as I said, I asked you to think about the criteria yourself. It was a short clip, but let's pick out just 1 or 2 little things that clearly indicate what kind of mark the student might get. The first thing, just from that small clip, It suggests that the answer is too short, and he doesn't say why, if you remember what to this question, do you like going to crowded places? The student, in fact, says, I don't know why, which is not a very good answer in the speaking test because if you say something, you should have a reason for saying it. This was not a good indication, and already I'm thinking round about 4 to 5, at least for the general mark in this for the student. Therefore, if you force the examiner to ask why, when you say there is no why, then that's problem also because it means your answer's way too short. In part one, for example, the only other question an examiner can ask, apart from the one in his book, is why. And it's a good idea to say why before he asks you, because that means you speak longer. So again, you do not force the examiner to ask why. You explain why before he asks, and it makes your answer longer. But I'm thinking definitely immediately this is a 4 or a 5. As I said, the student replies, I don't know why. I think this, no idea why I think this. That's the indication, I would say, I'm thinking already of a 4 to 5. And then the most noticeable thing, the number one thing I said you had to do was speak at length. But of course, this student, you can clearly hear, does not speak at length because they stop a lot and there's long hesitations. If you have long hesitations, I immediately start thinking at most a 4 for fluency because the student's just leaving silences and we're running out of time already. And with this kind of question, the student continued to have long hesitations. So therefore, you would say the fluency and coherence there is clearly going to be around about a 4. If it gets worse, the mark gets worse. And again, the lexical resource, you're going to give a 4 or possibly less, depending how the exam goes, because the student is limited. They cannot say why they think something. What does that mean? They don't have the words. They have no idea. And even at one point, I had to say to the student, do you mean this word, anxious? Grammatical accuracy and range. It sounds to me that if he could keep speaking, that might be maybe a 5, but he doesn't keep speaking. The answers are short, so I can't give more than a 4. One thing I would say is the pronunciation is quite clear, but again, I cannot give a 5, 6, or 7 for pronunciation if the answers are too short because there's no flow going, so I can't get the rhythm and stress. The individual words I understand, but I'm not going to give more than a 4 for that. There you see the demonstration of the basic things I was saying you have to improve upon, in particular, these hesitations. All right, so before we go any further, I want to look at common misunderstandings people have about the IELTS speaking test. When I say common misunderstandings, I mean wrong ideas about what the test wants. Everything I'm going to show you here is wrong in some way. And so I just quickly explain why they're wrong. Many students believe that if they speak really quickly, then they're going to get a really good mark, but not necessarily. First of all, it's difficult to understand someone who speaks incredibly fast, even a native speaker. What you really need to do is just speak at a native speaker rate, like the way most people speak. You hear that they don't speak very very. This is no use. Speaking fast is not necessarily useful advice, and I have come across students who have come to examinations. They speak very fast in order to hide that they don't know any grammar or vocabulary. So the student talks nonsense, but he talks nonsense very quickly, and he hopes that the speaking fast will hide the fact that their English is terrible. Some students do this. They think it's a clever tactic, but I've got to be able to hear your words. If I can't hear your words, it's a waste of time. It's an English test, so remember, you have to hear grammar and vocabulary also. Right, so that's the idea. Some students think that if you speak really fast, maybe the examiner cannot hear your mistakes. You must get all your grammar right. So again, this is something I mentioned earlier. It's wrong to think that you need to be correct with all your grammar. Even an 8, and sometimes it even mentions in a 9 that they get tiny grammar wrong. Again, not the best advice to get all the grammar right. It's the range part, remember? Range and accuracy. So it's more important to try different kinds of grammar. Some right, some wrong, but to get it all right doesn't mean anything. As I said, if you could speak in very short sentences, get everything 100% correct grammatically, you'll still get a low mark because you're not trying different kinds of long sentences. So it's wrong to think you must get all your grammar right because it doesn't work this way. So as I said, if you give these really short answers and the grammar is absolutely perfect, you still do not get a good mark. The idea that you'll show the examiner how good you are, remember the word limited? If you speak in really short answers, perfect grammar, you're actually showing you're limited with the range because you cannot use other kind of grammar. So it doesn't matter how correct you are. And then other students think that they must learn hundreds of big, important sounding words. And again, remember the test is what? At most 14 minutes. Are you going to use hundreds of big, important sounding words? This will be problematic for everyone, especially the examiner. No one speaks like this. What you want with vocabulary is you want a good mixture of different kinds of words. You don't need hundreds of them, just a few good idiomatic expressions, perhaps, a few good topic vocabulary words, so that kind of thing, and some good general vocabulary that you can use in different kinds of answers. We don't, it doesn't mean 300 or 400 kinds of words, just little bits spread throughout and the examiner can hear them. So, no, you must not learn hundreds of big important sounding words, especially if you want around a 7. That's not necessary. And many students believe they have to memorize words and passages and then say them in the exam and they'll get a really good mark. Again, no, wrong again. I would say none of that's correct. We'll just put a big cross through it, and then we'll go to this. First of all, you have to be able to pronounce these memorized words. If you cannot do that, it's no use. You have to use them correctly. If you cannot do that, it's no point in memorizing all these words. With passages, often students memorize answers, but they don't know the question. So sometimes the question is slightly different from the answer they memorized, and it sounds strange and it's obviously memorized. And an examiner is instructed not to count anything they think may be memorized. Also, when you memorize something and then you say it out loud, it almost sounds like you're reading it. It sounds different. So this is terrible advice. You must not memorize words. Some students believe that you have to say things the examiner likes to hear. Something like saying things that the examiner agrees with. Again, this is not the role of the examiner. You can say what you want. The examiner often isn't fully paying attention to the content. It has to make sense. But the examiner's focusing on every word that you say because they're studying your language. It doesn't matter if you agree with the examiner or not. They're concentrating on the makeup of your words, the actual words and how you use them, the language. So you don't need to say things the examiner likes to hear. Also, you must not talk about yourself all the time. You can do this in part 1, perhaps even a little bit in part 2 when you're describing an experience of yours. But in part 3, you must not keep talking about yourself or giving examples that are personal. In part 3, you're trying to talk about unfamiliar topics. Part 1, familiar topics, that means you. Part 3 It's opened up to the whole wide world that you must talk about, not just yourself. So you must not talk about yourself all the time. In part one, yes. The rest, it starts to change in part two. Part three, no. Don't talk about yourself. It's good to sit on the fence. So to sit on the fence means that you don't have an opinion, really. You often answer maybe yes or maybe no. Maybe yes, maybe no. So sometimes that's okay. I mean, you genuinely think there's some good things and some not good things. That's fine. But if you say it for everything, it starts to sound like you don't have any thoughts of your own and you don't have an opinion of your own. So all you do is say maybe yes, maybe no. you know. So you can say it, but if you sit on the fence all the time, sometimes it doesn't sound like you have any strong opinions about anything. It's not good to sit on the fence all the time. And when we look at pronunciation, often students believe they will not get a good mark if they have a strong accent. As I mentioned in pronunciation, it's not really the case. You can have a strong accent, but it's not the point. The point is the rhythm and stress. For example, I'm from Scotland, and I don't speak English the same way as an English person or an American, but Americans and English mostly understand what I say, and I mostly understand what they say. And it's not the accent. They hear the accent and then they realize that it's the same, basically. Rhythm and stress is basically generally the same in English. Uh, so they hear the accent, but it's separate a little bit from the rhythm and stress. If you're answering, you will have an accent. That's okay, never mind. Uh, more importantly is the sound of your voice. Is it got the ups and downs of Russian or Mandarin or whatever? Or does it have the ups and downs of English, but with an accent? That's the difference. So you will not be marked down for accent, but you will not get a good mark if your rhythm and stress sounds like a different language. Little different. So you must forget all this. These are misunderstandings. Basically, they got the wrong idea about what the speaking is. Don't worry about any of these because they're not true, basically. So we've had a look at the marking criteria, etc. Little things we should remember from now about the marking criteria. What's not good? Here's very basic English for you. So what's bad? It's limited. You don't want to hear this word. You don't want this word to have anything to do with your English. You don't want to hear a teacher saying your vocabulary is limited. You don't want to make the examiner think your vocabulary or your grammar is limited. We do not want short answers. We do not want hesitations. The long silences and even small silences are dangerous. We do not want to repeat ourselves. Repetition in speaking and in writing is not good unless you're doing it for a specific reason. Because basically repetition suggests you're going around in circles and your conversation is not progressing. You're not getting anywhere. Unclear. You don't want unclear. Unclear could be about pronunciation. Not quite sure what you said. Unclear could also be about the words you use. It's kind of vague, basic words that I don't quite get exactly what you mean. Fast is not good. Fast suggests it's so quick, I'm having to concentrate to understand. A good pace, you don't want to speak slowly, but you want just a reasonable middle pace to talk at. Good things. Well, you want to hear the word flexible. If your teacher says you have strong flexibility and you're very flexible vocabulary and grammar, good. That's very good. That's a very positive thing, better than limited. Range is good. Of course, you want to be accurate, but if a teacher or an examiner thinks you have good range, for example, vocabulary and grammar, this is excellent for you because it will go up even if you make mistakes. And length of time. So long is definitely good, short is not. So you can keep speaking at length or you speak in longer sentences. This is good. Long tends to be good. And if you speak too long, it's not really a problem because the examiner will ask you to stop. And the examiner is not being rude, it's just you're speaking a long time and the examiner must ask you more questions. It's not terrible if the examiner interrupts you because it suggests you are speaking a long time. No, that's okay. Clear obviously is better than unclear, so your pronunciation or your use of words is so clear that you're very precise. If you sound natural in any way or you use natural sounding vocabulary, this is always good because natural means like a native speaker in this case. We're now looking at the questions. Many questions in the IELTS exam are what you would say are rephrased or recycled. For example, 3 years ago, they asked questions about travel. And probably this week, they're going to ask you somebody about travel. They may not be the exact same phrasing or the exact same questions, but they're generally the same. They just rephrase them to make them sound new. For example, in the past, they may ask you, do you like taking photos? And so 3 years, 4 years later, they don't want to use the same exact question. So they change it, they rephrase it. How often do you capture special moments with a camera? Do you like taking photos? How often do you take photos? It's this kind of rephrasing. But if you notice, if you memorize an answer, for example, you memorize, do you like taking photos? And then you say blah, 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 blah. You go to the exam and they've rephrased the question. It's going to have a slightly different emphasis or stress. Your memorized answer may sound weird and wrong. You know, this is why you shouldn't memorize. But in general, they do reformulate and rephrase questions from the past. They just perhaps don't write the exact same words. So here's some more examples. Here's books and reading. Old one may say, do you like reading books? The new one may say, how much time do you spend reading each week? They don't exactly ask you about if you like it, but the whole idea of how much time do you spend, it's a rephrasing suggesting that you can say, well, I love reading books, or I read every day means you love it. I never read books means you don't. Do you prefer reading books or magazines? So it's basically the same kind of idea, but rephrased. But when you rephrase the stress and what they're asking is a little different. Same with clothes. Do you like shopping for clothes? How often do you buy new clothes? Or rephrase, what kind of clothes do you usually wear? This is what they do. It's the same topic, but they just rephrase the same topics. How many times have they asked you about the environment when you're practicing for IELTS? And they've done it for years. Are they the exact same questions? You could go back and check. And now we're going to listen to another student. So this student is going to answer the same question as the last student. Do you like going to crowded places? As before, you can listen to the student and decide what marks would you give them, what's good and what's not good. You could also compare the student to the previous one.
Well, I think it depends on the situation. I don't mind some bustling places like festivals or markets because I think they're lively and full of energy. Like I enjoy visiting night markets where I can mingle with locals and try many kinds of street food. But but I dislike extremely packed spaces like um, subways and buses at rush hours. That there were no personal places and it's very crowded and I can't bear it. So I think I'm selective about crowded places.
Okay, so you heard the next student answering the same question. What did you think? Was it the same level as the previous student? What did they do well? What did they need to improve upon, etc.? This time, the student stated her position at the beginning, and then she went on to speak about why she thought this. She didn't stop and have a long hesitation and say, I don't know, I can't think of, I don't know why. No, she said it depends on the situation. So that's fair enough. A good phrase to continue on with. Okay, so do you like going to crowded places? Well, it depends on the situation. And then she explains why. So she did try to speak at length here. And she also used some noticeable words and expressions that were rather good and suggested to me some flexibility, a little bit of flexibility there. These words like full of energy, street food, I can't bear it. I think she said words like bustling. So that, to me, maybe is round about slightly better than a 6, if you can give a 6.5 type of vocabulary. And if this kind of vocabulary continues throughout the test, she could be approaching a 7 with these kind of words and phrases. She uses them correctly, and I understood what she said when she said them. So that was good. The vocabulary was quite strong in places. So I'm thinking 6.5 to 7 maybe. She does try to speak at length. However, there was some and ums, but they were not the same as the first candidate who had long gaps. The ums and ms that for this student would need to improve for me anyway to get a 7, but she's quite strong. She keeps going and she finds words. So again, I'm thinking 6 to 6.5 area. If she could stop a few more of the ums and ems, you know, then I would say better. Of course, native speakers and myself also, we stop and say, how long do we stop when we say these things? Is it just very brief pause? She's much better. It looks good. It sounds good. Maybe if she took away some of the ums and ahs, the fluency would go quite high, actually. The vocabulary is good also, and she does show a willingness to speak at length. And I understood, I believe, everything that she said as far as pronunciation is concerned. So it just needs that bringing things together a little better instead of the very slight hesitations, I think. So good one, I think, reasonably good, reasonably good. Okay, so when you go into the test, it's good before you go to know what you're good at and what you're not good at, your strengths and your weaknesses. Some people are good at the fluency. They are able to keep talking, for example. Okay, so you do not want to destroy your fluency by stopping and thinking about words, you know. If your fluency is your strength, then don't sacrifice it by overthinking the grammar. Now, some students do this. They start thinking about grammar and then their fluency stops and they hesitate and they think, no, just keep going, keep going. That's the number one thing. If your fluency is strong, don't destroy it by stopping to think of words and grammar. If your vocabulary is not strong, is like your weakness, then what you've got to do is, before you do any examination, find some useful words. And if you watch some of my other videos available on my channel related to vocabulary, and there are many, so please check the links, you will find quite a lot of different kinds of vocabulary that you can learn. Number one is the kind of formal words in particular, that you can use for many different topics. That means that no matter what the question, you know some good words that you can use when you're answering it. Then, of course, you've got topic vocabulary. So that's specific to the topic that you're talking about. So you need some of them. You don't need to be an expert. And thirdly, you have some of these more native speaker-like expressions that you would use when speaking. For example, collocations and idioms. And you can find plenty of them on my channel. Also, check the links again for these videos. But the important part is, if your vocabulary is weak, you must focus on that to improve it before the exam. When you go to the exam, you don't want to stop trying to think of words, because then it will destroy your fluency. So before you go, you need to work on this. Recognize what you're not good at. Work on this, you know. Don't do it in the exam. Saying, "Oh, what was the word?" No, too late. Focus on that weakness before the exam. When you're in the exam, focus on your fluency, etc., to keep speaking. If your pronunciation is weak, then it's something to prepare before the exam. And that is, remember, don't worry about the accent. First of all, consider the pronunciation of individual words, then your intonation, your rhythm and stress, that kind of thing. The weakness should be prepared before the exam. If you're strong, for example, in fluency, or you're brilliant at grammar, obviously you want to focus and show it, but you don't want to destroy the rest of your marks. So strong fluency, keep being fluent and keep speaking. Weak vocabulary and pronunciation or grammar, practice this before and concentrate on practicing and improving it, and then do it in the exam. So you know yourself. What are you good at? What are you not good at? The weaknesses, do this in advance. And the strengths, focus on them while you're in the exam. The speaking test itself, as I said, it can be up to 14 minutes. It can be way less. So it can be less than that. It's 11 to 14 minutes. The examiner can decide to finish on the 11 or finish on the 14. Something like that. Why would he finish early? Maybe because he's heard enough. So often the examiner makes up their mind at the beginning of the exam in part one what they think your mark is, and then they check it as you go along. If you haven't changed the examiner's mind by the time you start part three, the examiner might just say, okay, I know, so we'll finish the exam early. If they take it to the very end, it may be a good indication that they're still thinking about it, considering maybe you're changing their mind in a good or not so good way. Okay, so but it's usually this is the length. Let's look now at the difference between part one style questions and part two style questions, all right? Just to see what they're looking for. Let's see, part one. Do you like taking photos? What kind of photos do you usually take? Do you prefer taking photos with your phone or with a camera? Do you ever print out the photos you take? Have you ever taken a photography course or learned how to take better pictures? So as you see, these questions are about you, and they're very simple ones about you, and they expect that you are able to answer them because they're about you, and it shouldn't be so difficult. Now here's part two style question. Describe a photo you took that you like. You should say when you took it, what was in the photo, why you took it, and explain why you like it. So this time, of course, the question is one question, really, which you then have to explain in great detail. And part three style questions, it's not about why you like taking photos, and this is the clear difference. It's about why do people in general like taking photos? I know why you do. But why do other people do it? Why do most people do it, for example? So it's no longer about familiar questions, it's about unfamiliar. You've got to think about other people. Why do they do it? And then you have questions that go deeper. So a question like number one will introduce what you're going to talk about, and then everything else will try to go deeper into the subject. So how has photography changed with the development of smartphones? Do you think people take too many photos these days? Are photos a good way to preserve memories? What are the differences between professional photography and personal snapshots? In your opinion, this time, can a photograph ever truly capture the feeling of a moment? So again, although it's about what you think, you're having to go deep into the meaning of photography and photos, etc. And then you have number 7, are photographs memories? So we become more abstract in the way we answer the questions. Now, this part 3 is where you get the high marks, of course. If you have a poor part 1, but you do a very good part 3, they forget part 1, basically. Okay, so this is the difference in the style of question. All right, so the test. We look at part 1, the familiar topics. We have an introduction and an interview, and it's usually 4 to 5 minutes. 0 to 1, suppose the examiner greets you, checks your ID, maybe stares in your face if you're there in person. And then he asks simple questions about the kind of topics we're looking at that you know about: home, work, study, family, hobbies, travel, daily life. Usually 3 topics he asks you. So yeah, he begins usually with the home or your study, etc. And then there's 2 other topics, and he's got to try to ask some questions from each category. Just a quick pause here. If you're finding this video helpful, don't forget to click like and subscribe below. It always helps this channel grow and reach more IELTS learners. And if you're interested in my full courses and IELTS books, there are links below in the descriptors also. Okay, let's get back to the video. Okay, so as we've mentioned, you don't want to give short answers. In part 1, you don't have to be very long in your answers, but you don't want to just say yes, no. You got to say why you think something. But this part of the test is like a Q&A, a question and an answer. So here are some typical part 1 questions or topics, really. Home, accommodation, hometown, city, and you can see throughout. So these are standard topics. Now, perhaps in part 2 and 3, they will ask you on this topic also. But in part 1, they're all about you. Just you, what you personally feel and do about these topics. And so you get these, for example. Food, what's your favorite food? Do you prefer eating at home or in restaurants, etc.? Travel, do you like traveling? Why not? What kind of places do you like to visit? All about you again. Do you usually travel alone or with other people? And what was the last place you visited on holiday? You know, all about you, basically. And it's a kind of warm up. If you're wanting to get a good mark round about a 7, then this is just warming you up. It's getting you ready to show what you can do in part 2 and 3. Music, what kind of music do you usually listen to? Do you prefer listening to music live or recorded, etc.? Here are some simple ones about what you do. However, you do get some strange part 1 questions. For example, do you often watch or listen to the weather forecast? How interesting. Bags? What kind of bags do you usually use? Dreams? Do you often remember your dreams? Numbers? Trees. Do you like trees? Let's talk about trees. Mirrors. How often do you how often do you look at yourself in the mirror? Well, I would say, well, what do you mean exactly? You know? Street markets. Do you like shopping at street markets instead of shops? Handwriting. Do you usually write by hand or on a computer? Sitting down. Where do you usually sit in your home, right? Sit on top of the wardrobe, maybe. And there's others like sunglasses. I remember sunglasses are one of them as well. Mathematics. Do you like mathematics at school? So, for example, I don't like mathematics. I cannot just say, no, I don't like mathematics. I've got to say why. So these topics are meant to be simple. The examiner doesn't really care if you like trees or not. They just want to see how you handle unexpected questions. So they are familiar, but they're a little surprising. Maybe you'll be surprised and you cannot talk. You don't know what to say if you're unlucky. The best strategy is, of course, don't panic. Give your short opinion and then explain why. Expand it normally and say. For example, do you have a favorite number? And you say, yeah, 7. That's a weak answer. So you got to say why, give some more information. So better one would be, yes, my favorite number is 7. I think it's lucky because I was born on the 7th of the month, so it feels special to me. Explain why you said 7. And again, don't worry about the exam, what the examiner thinks of your opinion. You know, he doesn't really care if you have a horrible opinion about something. Maybe it'll annoy him, but he must be professional. He's listening to the words you're using and how you use them. So, your answers, at least answer with 3 sentences. Say something, explain why. Maybe if you can give an example. If you go on too long, he'll stop you, he'll interrupt you, and it's not a terrible thing. It just means he's got to watch his time. You will see the C structure that I suggest in my other videos, which you can catch on my channel if you have a look. And the C structure means statement, explanation, example. You make a statement, you explain why, and then you give an example. This extends your sentences in speech and in writing. And it's the easy one to keep going. Every time you say something, explain why, try to think of an example, you're fine. If you can use connecting words, it's always impressive to an examiner because he's listening for these words. So let's listen to 2 different students this time answering some questions. This time again, listen and remember what we talked about earlier about the marking criteria, the fluency, coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy plus pronunciation. You think about it when you listen to the first one and the second one, and you can also compare the two and who would get the better mark, etc. So let's have a listen. What skills are you currently learning or trying to learn now?
Is is exciting to ex exporting new knowledge. I perfect being touched by someone. It helped me solve problem more quickly, and I usually turn to my teachers. They are knowledgeable. Um, I touch my brother to ride a bike, and I trying to learn painting skills now.
Right, okay. Was it easy to teach your brother how to ride a bike? Who do you usually go to when you need help learning something?
Well, I think it depends on the topic. Like for technical skills like coding or finding some ways to do experiments, I will turn to um, online websites and finding some teachers online and go some websites like Bilibili and YouTube to find some tutorials. And I think it's very helpful and there are many step-by-step guides. And for some hand-on things like cooking, I will ask my mom. She is very patient and I can learn a lot from her. And for some academic problems, I will consult my teacher or my classmates because I think sometimes a peer explains things more relatably than a textbook, and I can understand the knowledge more easily.
So we listened to 2 separate students on a similar topic, but with 2 different questions. Well, the first student did try to keep speaking, so this would be noticed, despite the pronunciation, did try to keep going, which is a good thing. However, the pronunciation for the student clearly has some difficulties with rhythm and stress. Some individual words are difficult to understand because they're mispronounced. For example, the student seemed to say the word touched several times when clearly she meant to say teached, which would be wrong also. But what she was trying to say was taught, and that was the correct one. So The mispronunciation here of an individual word sounded like a totally different word, and therefore this affects and influences the mark, not just in pronunciation. It's difficult to quite understand if individual words are mispronounced. The pronunciation in particular here would be the negative, whereas the positive is the student is trying to keep speaking and can be understood to a certain extent, apart from the influence of pronunciation. But the second student with the second question gives extended answers. So clearly, this student gives examples and explains why. She does this without me, the examiner, asking her to do so. That's perfect. That's what you want. So if you do this and you can keep speaking, your mark is going to be a good one. You don't wait for the teacher or the examiner to say, oh, why? You just say it because due to the fact that blah, blah, blah. And then you give examples and your answers are therefore extended smoothly. There's some noticeably good phrasing and good words used. So I'll turn to or step-by-step guide or to consult and to talk to my peers. These are all good words. They're not basic words. So comparing this to an answer the same student gave earlier, it seems quite consistent that the vocabulary is quite strong, and this time the pausing is again quite short, and she still manages to extend her answers quite smoothly, I think. Again, I'm thinking around the 6.5 area for this student. These are only small clips, but this is the impression I'm getting just from listening to these small clips now. We're looking at part 2 now, and this is called the long turn, but as we've seen already, long turns are quite useful throughout, particularly in part 3. But anyway, part 2 here is where the examiner will give you a task card. If you're sitting in the exam room with the examiner will hand you a card and a pen and paper to take notes, etc. And they'll give you 1 minute to make notes to help you during the exam. And you can glance down at your notes. You're not allowed to read large paragraphs from your notes, but you can glance at them just like you would when given a presentation and maybe you need a cue card to remind you what to say, but nothing more than that. So the examiner, though, will stay silent for 2 minutes when you're speaking for 2 minutes. Therefore, you need to speak for the full length of time, and it is very good for your mark if you do speak for the full length of time. And it's also fine if the examiner says, okay, thank you, and tells you to stop. That means you managed to keep going for the full length of time. So all of that would be then very good. If you finish after 1 minute, the examiner can often sit in silence and you both have to look at each other for another minute. So you don't want to do that. You want to speak for the full 2 minutes to show that you're capable of doing it. And then you want to give details in your talk to keep you speaking. The only thing the examiner can then do is perhaps after the 2 minutes is finished, can ask you a short question just to follow up on what you said. But for this question, you can give a very brief answer because if you start to give a long answer in the follow-up question, he'll stop you. It's a kind of politeness. Often the questions in part 2 look like this. They give you the card and they read the card. It says, describe a book you recently read. And then it will give you little ideas what to talk about. Describe what it was, how you got the book, what it was about, and why you liked and disliked it. Okay, so that's how it looks. And what you need to do, well, when you think of this part 2, they're asking you to give them one example. So, for example, a book. Describe a book. So you have one example, this one book, and then you have to Give details about the book, maybe introduce where you found the book, etc., what the book is. That's the beginning. Then you give lots of details about the book. And then you reflect upon it. You say, for example, how you felt about this book and, what it means to you, etc. And for this, you need topic vocabulary, of course. Some nice specific words would help. But in part two in particular, words that are very useful are adjectives. Adjectives to describe different things. So often you're asked to describe a person in part two of the speaking test. Therefore, you need adjectives to describe someone's appearance and personality. Often you're asked to describe a place, so you need adjectives to describe places, and it could be a thing, an object, so you need adjectives to describe that. And for most of the questions, most of them, at the end you need adjectives to describe how you feel about the person, the place, or the object. So adjectives are very useful for part two. The point here is, again, you're giving one example and then you're giving a lot of details of this example. And in the end, you're describing your feelings or what it means. So we're going to listen to two more students, and they're just parts of their speaking part two answers. And as we've done before, you can listen in terms of the marking criteria. And you can also listen to compare the difference, and you can think about what mark you might give to those students if you wish. Tell me about a law in your country that you think is important.
Except the basic law, like you can't kill any others. I think the most important law is the personal freedom shall not be infringed. Yeah, and I think any other.
Describe a large company that is well known in your country.
In my country, I think Huawei is a leading global technology company in China. It's specialized in smartphones and other consumer electronics. Also like providing 5G net solution and cloud computing services. I think it's famous for its high quality smartphones and its role in developing 5G technology. Like the smartphone, like the Mate and P series, is very light. It competes with games like Apple and is known for innovation. What kind? Huawei has strong reputation for cutting edge technology and affordability. However, due to the geopolitical tensions, some Western countries have raised security concerns that affecting its global image. But still in many markets, it remains a trusted brand for reliable and high performance devices.
Okay, so you've heard two answers or parts of two answers from two different students. So the first student, when he was describing a law, again, there were long hesitations. So what does this mean? Well, the fluency is not going to get to the 6. He said, I don't know why. He says something, he cannot explain it. So that suggests limitations. But he did use one good phrase. It was in the passive, should not be infringed. And it would be better to say should not be infringed upon, but the use of the word and in the passive was an impressive word, impressive use of grammar. So that was quite good. Again, you're looking at the fluency, lexical resource, grammatical range, and accuracy and pronunciation. For this student, well, you're thinking, again, it's the fluency and coherence. It's these long hesitations and the inability to explain why he thinks something that would cause a lower mark. And for the second student, well, she keeps going, and that's very good. So that's what you must do. The number one thing you must do, although it's a little bit slow, she still keeps going. She still keeps speaking and gives a good extended answer. There were good phrases in there. Again, anytime you can use passive correctly is good for your grammar score. She used expressions like it is known for innovation and other good words like cutting edge technology. So again, this is certainly above the previous level of student for fluency and coherence. I could understand her no problem. She kept going, although it was quite slow. I would still say that's a 6 at least. Lexical resource, well, there were good phrases and words that were above a 5, certainly. So you're looking at 6.5 again. Grammatical range and accuracy, okay, nothing, it wasn't all perfect, but there were some good uses of complex sentences in there. And the pronunciation for me was mostly clear, though some individual words were mispronounced and there's a little flatness, but it was good enough, I think, still for the 6. Here are some other sample questions. So you could get describing a time when something happened. Now, what's important to remember, there's a lot of the part 2 questions are talking about the past. Therefore, you're going to have to remember your past tenses when you speak. Describe a time when you made a promise to someone in the past, and there you go. So you have descriptions. And again, notice the last part, they ask you to explain how you felt. So how do you feel about something? Did you like something? Often this is the case that part 2 questions, no matter what they ask you about, often they ask you about how you felt about something. So having adjectives to describe your feelings is very useful. One of the questions we just heard, describe a large company that is well known in your country. And again, you describe it. And this time they're asking you about how it has influenced people's lives. And you could possibly say, how people feel about this company. Describe a toy that you liked in your childhood, takes the same form. Why? The last question explained why you liked it so much. How did you feel about it? A noisy place? And again, what's the last question? Explain how you felt about being in that place. So you're describing a place. You need some good adjectives to describe this place. So as I said, if you don't speak for 2 minutes, the examiner will often sit in silence till the time is up because remember, he is being recorded. There's usually a recording device there to make sure that he obeys the rules. But no matter what, the examiner wants to hear details in your answer. That's what he's looking for. So it's not because he finds the idea of your toy fascinating. Again, he's listening to the language. He wants to listen to the words you're using. How precise and exact are they? And remember again, the examiner is not judging your opinion in your mark. Maybe secretly he is, but he must be professional. So you're free to say how you feel and you're free to say your opinion. No matter what it is, you're free to say it. And the examiner, as I said, is supposed to focus on your language. And finally, we come to part 3. And part 3 is a discussion. It's not a question and answer part, and it's not about you talking on your own. It's a discussion between 2 people, you and the examiner. And the examiner will ask you broader and more abstract questions. And usually the questions are related in some way to part 2. And in these questions, they require you to have opinions. It would be nice. Make comparisons, predictions, and give examples. And there's usually about 4 to 6 questions asked, maybe fewer, maybe more. If If the examiner asks a lot of questions, it suggests that your answers are not long enough. If you give long, full answers, 4 to 6 questions should be enough because remember, it's 5 minutes. That's all. However, one of the difficult parts of part 3 is that the examiner can ask you his own questions because this is supposed to be a developing discussion between two people. So the examiner may have an idea that comes to his head in the middle of your conversation, and therefore he decides to make up his own question and ask you, and this can often be a surprise. So here is what some of the questions look like. For example, animals. So in part 2, you describe a wild animal you want to know more about. Therefore, in part 3, it's connected, and they may ask you questions like this. Why should we protect wild animals? Why are some people more willing to protect wild animals than others? And you can see as it goes along how the questions go. And again, these questions are not about you personally. They're asking about people in general, the world, whatever. Okay. But they're all connected to part 2, where we heard you talk about your wild animal that you want to know more about. Or it could be in part 2, you talk about a good friend who's important to you. And then in part 3, you talk about how do children make friends at school? Is it better to have a few close friends or many casual ones? Can friendships be replaced by family? Can bosses and employees be friends? So therefore, part 3 takes it deeper and further. So we're going to listen to 2 more students in part 3. And again, we'll listen for fluency, coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. So we'll listen to 2. Again, do as you did before. Think about where they may gain marks and where they may not. Are they limited? Are they flexible? You decide. Is true equality ever possible in society?
Well, I think it is impossible because there is no absolute fairness, just only have relative fairness. If we don't consider a person's upbringing, background, and mm, and uh, and the studying level, just uh, treat them use one uh, use one uh, use one treatment. I think people uh people may not have the fairness. For example, in different countries, people have different uh, culture and teaching, so they get different knowledge. But if they got but give them the same exam, it is unfairness.
Right. Okay. So does that mean if you cannot get total absolute fairness, so does that mean that we should be unfair then? It's okay to be unfair.
Yes.
Is it fair for some people to earn significantly more money than others?
Yes, I do think it is fair for someone to earn more and some people earn less. Um, it is true that some of jobs that based on a lot of brain works or strategies always have higher salaries. This is because these jobs always require the employers possess a lot of skills such as communication, computer, or math, and so on. So is so it's not every people can meet these requirements. But for some repetitive work and physical work, that's almost every people can do it. So it is common for these jobs to have a lower salary.
Okay, so for the first student, we look at the criteria again, student M. And there was a bit of hesitation where the student is searching for the word, use one treatment, I think she said at one point, and she's searching for any more words, and that's lexical resource, but it then slows down the speech again. She does give examples, and that extends the response, so that's good. That's what you need to do. And she did use some good phrases like no absolute fairness and relative fairness. That sounded rather good. So these are good words. Again, slightly above the 5 mark, I would suggest for lexical resource. The hesitation is limiting, so is it 5.5 to 6 here, perhaps, just for that, the hesitation and the slow speech, perhaps also. The second student does keep going, and she extends her response, quite a long response to one question, and that's good. It was all relevant information. She explains why she thinks something, and she uses some good phrases like can meet this requirement. That sounds okay. And again, you just judge again from this. It's a reasonably to 5.5 to 6 kind of area all round. But what her strong point is that she extended everything she said. It was easy to understand what she was talking about and trying to tell me. And it was a nice long answer, so she could keep going. And then you can focus on the grammar and vocabulary therein. So you can have other questions like this, an exciting activity you tried for the first time. That's what you describe in part 2, and it may look like this in part 3. So the road to success in part 3 is understanding that often the questions involve deeper context. Up until part 3, you're describing how you feel about things, surface descriptions, and talking about things that you've seen or people you know, etc. But in part 3, you're talking about slightly deeper concepts. So what's beneath the surface of your argument or your discussion? Often these concepts can be slightly philosophical, like what's the difference between reality and perception, or personal morality versus ethics, or freedom versus responsibility. So these deeper concepts that they're hoping you can talk about. And remember, often people take this exam because it's academic and they want to go to university, where university is supposed to discuss such kind of concepts. When you're answering this, you could try to give an opinion, give your reason, give an example, as we've been looking at. It's like the C structure. You say what you want to say, you say why, and then you give an example, and then you could predict what you think will happen in the future, or you could give the other point of view to show that you know there are other ways of thinking apart from your own. So up until part 3, you're talking about your own opinion, trying to explain it and give examples. But in part 3, you're trying to show that you know other ideas that maybe you agree with, maybe you don't, but you understand things in a deeper way. So perhaps you could add the prediction or the other points of view that you know about. Of course, what do I mean when I say part 3 talks about these concepts? How does it look when I say this? So first of all, if you're interested in part 3 and how these concepts come across, I have several videos available on my channel, one in particular which goes into these deeper questions, and you can find that on my channel and in the links. Okay, so for example here, speaking part 3, the deeper questions could relate to reality versus perception. So look at history and culture, for example. How does history influence the way people perceive the present? So what you think of as history, how does that affect how you see now? Do you think cultural background affects how people see reality? Why or why not? If your cultures are very different, Do you really see reality the same way? Now, a student who can discuss this is going to get a good mark, because if you can get across meaning, it suggests that you're able to be flexible with your language. That's the point of these kind of questions. They're testing to see, have you got enough flexibility to try to discuss such topics? In part 3. How has the perception of beauty changed over time? Did people perceive beauty the same 300 years ago compared to today? Or can myths and legends shape people's perceptions of historical events? You hear all these myths and legends that probably didn't happen. Does that change how you see history, etc.? These kind of questions come later in part 3. And if you're asked these, it's because the examiner thinks that maybe you have the flexibility to be able to discuss them a little bit. Similarly, personal morality and decision making. What factors, you could say, influence a person's sense of morality? Is it always wrong to lie, or are there situations where lying is acceptable? Do people naturally develop a sense of right and wrong? Or do you have to be taught this? And how do you think social media affects people's moral decisions? So does social media change a person's morality, for example? And again, speaking, you could think of education and parenting as a topic. Should children be given more freedom in their education, or should they be guided by strict rules and disciplines? How can parents balance giving their children freedom while ensuring they are responsible? So again, freedom versus responsibility. Do you think schools should focus more on teaching responsibility rather than academic subjects? Why or why not? And at what age should young people start taking full responsibility for their own lives? That last question is very common if you do this topic in the IELTS exam. They often ask, when should a child begin deciding things for themselves? So you can give a surface answer, but this is where they're looking. Have you got the flexibility to talk quite deeply about such a question? The examiner is thinking, is the student aware of different issues and perspectives? Because this requires more specific and more flexible use of the language to tell the examiner about these issues and things, and when you go to university, it's quite important, and that's why it's in the last part of the IELTS exam. Are you only able to see what you think, or are you able to see what others might think, even though you may not agree with them? That's a topic that even native speakers have trouble with today. And remember, examiners mostly will hear students discuss topics on a surface level. So if you're able to discuss these even slightly deeper than a surface level, the examiner remembers it, and he sees your language as more flexible, and therefore your mark can be better. All right, and lastly, let's look at preparation. So I would say one of the keys to preparation for the speaking test and for the writing to a certain degree is to know your topics. You should think beforehand, what topics in the exam, and you should know the general topics, whether it's health, the environment, travel, etc. Are there some topics that you know quite a lot about, or you are able to speak about? You don't need to be an expert, but are there topics out there that you're able to speak about, you're already able to speak about? Or are there topics out there that you don't know anything about, and if the examiner asks you, you'll be in trouble? If there are topics like this, you need to find something out about these topics to give yourself something to talk about, not to be an expert, but you want to be able to talk about something, even if it's one example. For example, if they ask you about art, you know nothing about art, you should prepare beforehand, maybe find out some information about a painting so that you can refer to it and give yourself something to talk about. So look at the topics. What ones do you not really know much about, or you may need help talking about? Find out something. So which topics do you know about? Which topics do you not know about? You better find out about some of the topics you're unfamiliar with, because if you don't have a lucky day, you're going to get one of these topics. I would also suggest trying to practice your answers, even if you're speaking yourself. You want to think about this C structure. You want to make a statement and practice giving reasons and examples for your statement. Say something and then practice then continuing to speak, saying why and give an example so that you can have these longer stretches, because the length of your speaking is important. Again, you don't want short answers. You don't want to speak for half an hour on one question, but you don't want the short answers. You want to give the full answer. So I think it's key in any examination that you look at the criteria, what the examiner wants. You find out as much as you can about what the examiner wants from you, and then you try to give the examiner what they want, because if you do, they'll give you a better mark. You want to learn about the common topics, as I've just said. So some common topics you may know something about and can speak about, others maybe not. So you should solve this, but don't memorize answers. Just get some good words for these topics will help. A little bit of information so you feel confident to talk about them in some way. Recording yourself can help each day, just practicing that structure, that it gets giving reasons and examples for what you think. You want to use your strengths in the exam, okay? Before the exam, you want to try and prepare and make your weaknesses stronger. You can practice the test with a student, or maybe an AI tool is a good one. But you don't need to be perfect. You must remember that. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be clear, fluent, and responsive. All right, so I hope this video has been useful to introduce you to the basics of the IELTS speaking exam. There are lots of videos available on my channel, and you can search there. If you're interested in my courses, you can click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.